You are a woman in 1828. You feel the morning chill seep through your worn-out shawl as you stand on the uneven stones of Bolton Market. The fall mist clings to your ankles like ghostly fingers, and you can taste the metallic bitterness of fear on your tongue. Around your waist, coarse rope binds you like a farm animal being led to slaughter. Your husband John grips the end of this makeshift leash with trembling hands, his bloodshot eyes avoiding yours as he prepares to do something that will haunt both of you forever. Here stands a fine specimen of womanhood, he announces to the gathering crowd, his voice cracking with nervous energy. 24 years of age, strong constitution, skilled in domestic arts, and fertile as spring soil. The men press forward like vultures circling carrion, their calloused fingers prodding your arms to test muscle strength, forcing open your mouth to inspect your teeth like your livestock at auction. You feel their eyes cataloging every inch of your body, calculating your worth in shillings and pence. Your stomach churns as you realize that within the hour, your entire existence will belong to whichever stranger offers the highest bid. You might escape to a kinder master, or you might find yourself trapped in circumstances even more brutal than those you're fleeing. But here's the truth that makes your blood run cold. This degrading spectacle isn't criminal activity. This isn't desperate madness or underground trafficking. In the warped reality of Victorian England, this public humiliation represents your only legal pathway to freedom, your sole opportunity for what passes as divorce. The nightmare unfolding before you isn't the result of individual wickedness, though wickedness certainly fuels it. What you're experiencing is the inevitable outcome of a legal apparatus so merciless and inflexible that it drove ordinary people to create their own perverted form of justice. You're about to uncover how the most civilized society in human history constructed a system of female oppression so complete that it made human trafficking seem like mercy. The horror you're witnessing goes deeper than anything you can imagine. Behind this Market Square theater lies a machinery of dehumanization, so sophisticated that it would inspire modern oppressors and make contemporary trafficking networks seem primitive by comparison. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. But to understand how this atrocity became not merely possible, but essential, we must descend into a world where half the population existed in legal limbo, where women weren't humans with rights, but chattel to be owned, traded, and discarded at will. You would have awakened each morning in a reality where marriage didn't create partnership, it created ownership. Victorian England operated under the doctrine of coverture, a legal framework that eliminated women's existence the moment they spoke wedding vows. The brilliant legal mind Sir William Blackstone declared in 1753 that the husband and wife are one person in law, and that person is the husband. You became a femme couverte, literally a covered woman, your identity smothered beneath your husband's legal persona like a burial shroud that could never be removed. Imagine yourself as Catherine Mills, a seamstress in 1825. Before marriage, you could inherit money, operate a business, pursue legal action against those who wronged you. But matrimony transformed you into legal vapor. Your earnings vanished into your husband's pockets. Property passed down from your family became his to squander. That small dressmaking shop you'd built through years of careful work. Every needle, every bolt of fabric, every penny of profit belonged to him. You owned nothing, not even the worn shoes on your feet or the wedding ring on your finger. When your husband decided to discipline you with his fists, the law smiled and looked away. Domestic correction was his right, even his duty as head of household. When he spent your carefully saved money on gin and gambling, when he brought home disease from brothels, when he refused to work while you stitched until your fingers bled, the legal system called this proper masculine authority. But what happened when you reached your breaking point? when his correction shattered your ribs or his drinking left your children hollow-eyed with hunger. When you encountered someone else, perhaps a gentle widower who spoke kindly, or an unmarried man who offered respect instead of daily brutality. For the wealthy, divorce existed as a theoretical possibility, but it required such enormous expense and political influence that it might as well have been available only to royalty. Before 1857, obtaining divorce meant convincing Parliament to pass a private bill in your favor, a process costing upward of £1,000, equivalent to roughly £120,000 today. Even after the Matrimonial Causes Act made divorce theoretically accessible through courts, it still cost more than most families earned in multiple years. For ordinary people, marriage meant permanent bondage with only 5 possible escapes: mutual agreement to separate, abandonment, and flight; church, sanctioned separation for extreme cruelty, death, or selling the wife, like any other piece of property. What you've heard so far was nothing compared to the systematic nightmare that was about to unfold. The individual horror you've witnessed was merely one thread in a vast web of institutionalized cruelty that would reveal how supposedly enlightened civilization could normalize the complete reduction of women to tradable commodities. The practice that emerged in the late 17th century wasn't born from ignorance or primitive thinking. It was the logical extension of sophisticated legal reasoning. If women were property under law, then surely that property could be transferred through standard commercial procedures. The ritual that developed combined degradation with ceremony, creating a grotesque fusion of divorce proceedings and livestock auction. You would have encountered newspaper advertisements written with the same clinical detachment used for selling cattle. William Henderson offers his wife Martha for disposal at Wakefield Market this Saturday. Sound in mind and body, experienced in housekeeping, good breeder. Serious inquiries only. Sometimes the notices carried personal touches. Robert Clark, finding domestic harmony impossible, will transfer his wife's obligations to any respectable party. She possesses skills in cooking, cleaning, and childcare. On the designated day, you would witness the husband escort his wife to the public marketplace, deliberately choosing locations where livestock normally changed hands. The symbolism was precise and calculated. The woman wore a halter fashioned from rope or leather, occasionally decorated with ribbons in a pitiful gesture toward dignity. This restraint wasn't merely theatrical. It branded her as property awaiting transfer, identical to any cow or sheep brought to market. The husband, acting as auctioneer, would begin soliciting bids with practiced salesmanship. What offers for this excellent woman? 22 years old, proven fertile, skilled with needle and thread, possesses all her natural teeth. The assembled men would surge closer, examining their potential purchase like horse traders evaluating bloodstock. They tested her hands for work calluses, scrutinized her face for beauty, sometimes demanded she demonstrate her voice to assess her temperament. You would be forced to witness something that shatters your understanding of human nature. These weren't wild savages or criminal outcasts. These were ordinary citizens, many regular churchgoers and tax-paying members of the community, participating enthusiastically in a system that reduced breathing, thinking human beings to price tags. A woman's value ranged from 2 shillings to several pounds, with most sales settling around 3 shillings, roughly 20 to 40 pounds in contemporary money. But here's where the historical evidence reveals a truth that transforms everything we think we know about these scenes. The majority of these sales were carefully orchestrated theatrical performances. The buyer was frequently the woman's secret lover, and the entire auction served as an elaborate form of consensual divorce and remarriage ceremony conducted in public view. The humiliation was genuine and traumatic, but it served a desperate legal purpose, creating witnesses who could testify that the woman had been legitimately transferred from one man to another. You're about to discover how this perverted theater became the only avenue to justice for people imprisoned within an impossible system. The system that enabled these horrors was more sophisticated than you can imagine, and the individual stories that emerged reveal depths of institutional cruelty that challenge everything we think we know about civilized society. The legal architecture that made wife selling seem logical wasn't some medieval holdover. It was the deliberate creation of educated men, distinguished judges, and celebrated scholars who systematically constructed a framework denying women fundamental humanity. Consider the surgical precision with which this dehumanization operated. Marriage didn't simply change your legal status. It performed what scholars termed civil death, a bureaucratic execution as methodical as any modern administrative process. Your property rights were surgically removed. Your contractual capacity was legally amputated. Your ability to represent yourself in courts was systematically eliminated. You became a legal ghost whose existence depended entirely on masculine permission. The Church, rather than opposing this system, provided divine authorization for female subjugation. Ministers preached that wives owed husbands the same absolute obedience that Christians owed to God. Marriage vows specifically required women to obey, creating religious justification for legal powerlessness that made resistance seem not just illegal but sinful. Even more chilling was how intellectual elites rationalized this arrangement. Legal commentators published lengthy treatises explaining how coverture actually protected women from the burdens of independence, as if stripping away someone's rights constituted benevolent care. They argued that wives benefited from masculine decision-making, comparing grown women to children who required constant supervision and guidance. The economic machinery was designed to ensure female dependency through deliberate exclusion. Women were barred from most professions and trades, guaranteeing they couldn't achieve financial independence. The few occupations available to them, domestic service, needlework, laundry, paid subsistence wages that made survival without male support virtually impossible. But the system's most diabolical feature was how it convinced victims to blame themselves for their suffering. Girls were trained from infancy that their worth derived solely from their ability to please men and produce children. They were taught that marital failure reflected personal moral deficiency, that virtuous wives could reform even the most brutal husbands through patience and submission. You would have inhabited a world where your own mother blamed you for your husband's violence, where neighbors shunned you for mentioning abuse, where clergy counseled enduring suffering as spiritual purification. The system didn't merely deny legal remedies. It made seeking help evidence of character failure and moral corruption. The parallels between these historical horrors and our modern world are more disturbing than you might expect, and the connections will change how you see the systems operating around you every single day. The fundamental logic that made wife selling seem reasonable, treating human beings as economic units whose value depends entirely on their utility to others, operates throughout contemporary society in forms we've learned to accept as normal. Consider how global supply chains depend on invisible workers whose suffering remains carefully hidden from consumers who benefit from their labor. Consider how economic policies prioritizing abstract market principles over human welfare create conditions where desperate people accept degrading employment or dangerous living situations because they literally have no alternatives. Consider how legal systems continue failing vulnerable populations, forcing them to seek rough justice through informal networks and community intervention. The crowds that gathered to watch wife sales weren't simply seeking entertainment. They were participating in community discussions about justice, morality, and acceptable behavior in ways that our increasingly privatized society has largely abandoned. When official systems fail to provide adequate remedies for intolerable situations, people create their own solutions, and those solutions often reveal the true values of the societies that produce them. You participate daily in economic and social systems that depend on other people's powerlessness, just as those market square spectators participated in reducing women to livestock prices. The comfort and convenience of modern life frequently rests on carefully concealed forms of exploitation that future generations may judge as harshly as we judge wife selling today. The women who endured those market squares with ropes around their waists weren't simply victims of historical barbarism. They were human beings attempting to survive within a system engineered to deny them meaningful choices. Some discovered genuine happiness with their new partners, building relationships founded on mutual respect rather than legal ownership. Others learned that changing masters didn't alter the fundamental nature of their bondage. Consider Elizabeth Porter, sold in Birmingham in 1831 to a blacksmith named David Thompson for 5 shillings. Elizabeth had secretly arranged her own sale, desperate to escape a husband who regularly beat her unconscious and squandered her earnings from taking in washing. David had been courting her clandestinely for 8 months, and both viewed the public auction as their only means of legitimizing their relationship. The ceremony drew over 400 spectators, who treated it as both community entertainment and formal validation of the new partnership. Elizabeth symbolically removed her own halter after the transaction completed, asserting some measure of control over her transfer between households. She and David remained together for 42 years, raising 7 children and establishing a small but prosperous metalworking business. Yet Elizabeth's story was constructed on a foundation of systematic injustice that no individual happiness could overcome. Her liberation required accepting that she remained property to be transferred rather than a person possessing inherent rights. Her choice existed between different forms of legal slavery, not between oppression and genuine freedom. Other women faced crueler fates. Rebecca Walsh, purchased in Manchester in 1829 by a stranger after her husband gambled away their rent money, discovered her new owner treated her worse than the man she'd tried to escape. When she attempted to flee, her purchaser had her arrested for theft, claiming she was stealing herself, which represented accurate legal reasoning under Victorian property law. Rebecca died 18 months later in the county workhouse, her spirit crushed by a system that offered escape from one form of abuse only through accepting another potentially worse form. Her story reminds us that individual agency within oppressive systems remains forever constrained by the fundamental structures defining what choices become available. Margaret Foster, sold with her 3 young children in Leeds in 1834, watched helplessly as her purchaser separated her family, keeping her for domestic labor while selling her children to different buyers who needed factory workers. The legal system treated her maternal bonds as irrelevant commercial considerations, prioritizing property rights over human relationships. These individual tragedies were just the beginning of consequences that would echo through history and into our modern world in ways that continue shaping how we think about human worth, legal justice, and the true price of survival in systems designed to benefit some at others' expense. The immediate aftermath of wife selling reveals how communities struggled to rebuild relationships and families after these traumatic transfers. Children separated from their mothers often never reunited, creating generations of families fractured by legal systems that prioritized property rights over human bonds. Many sold wives battled shame and depression lasting decades, even when their new circumstances improved materially over their previous situations. The practice gradually declined, not because society suddenly embraced enlightened values, but because legal divorce became marginally more accessible and economic transformations provided women alternative options. The Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857 reduced divorce costs somewhat, though it remained prohibitively expensive for working families. More significantly, industrial employment began offering women limited economic independence, reducing their absolute dependence on male financial support. But the deeper questions raised by wife selling remain urgently relevant in contemporary society. How do we construct systems serving human needs rather than abstract principles? How do we ensure progress reaches everyone, not merely the privileged few? How do we build societies where nobody faces choices between dignity and survival? The historical impact of wife selling extends far beyond its immediate victims. The practice normalized the concept that desperate people must accept whatever relief is offered, however degrading the terms. It reinforced the notion that legal systems need not provide justice for everyone, only for those possessing sufficient resources to access it. It demonstrated how communities can become complicit in systematic abuse by treating human suffering as entertainment rather than tragedy. Modern human trafficking operations employ remarkably similar techniques: public auctions, community normalization, economic desperation that makes any alternative seem preferable to current circumstances. The fundamental dynamics of power, desperation, and systematic dehumanization that made wife selling possible continue operating in different forms throughout the contemporary world. In the end, the women who wore halters in Victorian marketplaces teach us that human dignity cannot be purchased through practical benefits, that freedom cannot be achieved by accepting different forms of bondage, and that systems treating people as property inevitably corrupt everyone who participates in them. Their names were Elizabeth and Rebecca and Margaret, thousands of women whose individual stories largely vanished from historical records, but whose collective experience reminds us that behind every system of oppression are real people making impossible choices with whatever courage they can summon. They deserved far better than the world offered them, and their memory challenges us to construct societies where such choices never become necessary. The marketplaces stand empty now, but the questions they raised about human worth and legal justice remain as urgent today as they were 2 centuries ago. In remembering these women's stories, we honor not just their suffering, but our obligation to ensure that desperation never again forces people to auction their dignity for the mere hope of survival. If this glimpse into history's hidden darkness has left you wanting to uncover more buried truths, I've prepared another journey into the shadows of the past that you won't want to miss. Click on the video appearing on your screen now to discover another shocking chapter that history tried to erase. And if you found this exploration as compelling as I did, hit that subscribe button so we can continue peeling back the layers of history together. These forgotten voices deserve to be heard, and there are so many more stories waiting to be told.